Welcome to Book Backstory. My name is Carla Brandenburg, and I'm an award-winning author of romantic suspense and paranormal novels. This podcast is a walk along my journey. I plan to interview some of my favorite authors, share with you some of the things that get me excited to write a book, and the stumbling blocks during the process. Why do writers write? There's this quote by F. Scott Fitzgerald that goes, "You don't write because you want to say something. You write because you've got to say something." According to Fitzgerald, writing is a burning need to say something. I read another blog written by college students that echoed my belief that writing is our way to share life lessons and experiences through our works. A book can be a lifeline from an author to a reader, especially in the times we're living in. A way to escape from the four walls that surround us to another place and time. Transcribing thoughts to paper is a natural outpouring of our emotions. Jodi Picoult is also quoted as saying, "Write because you can't not write, or don't write at all." It really is a compulsion for most of us, and something that we just can't escape from. There are days when I feel like, "Oh, I can't do this anymore, it's just so hard," and then I go a day or two and it's like, I gotta write this. I'm going crazy with not writing. I have to let what's in my head out. So these quotes from these authors are echoed in various ways among many successful authors. Writing is an outlet of the mind, a way to put one's thoughts on paper and share ideas and knowledge with the world. It's a way to inspire a conversation. When I first started writing my first real book, I was inspired by a series of what-ifs. As my story goes, I'd had a wisdom tooth pulled and parked myself in front of the television where I watched Raiders of the Lost Ark. And when that was over, there was a special on PBS about Mount Vesuvius. Coincidence? My mind raced to correlate these two programs, and I was really excited when I connected the dots. I'd always had a fascination with Pompeii. I had been playing around with writing stories most of my life up until that point, but in that aha moment, I knew I had a story worth sharing. Imagine if the Holy Grail had been buried at the cataclysmic eruption of Mount Vesuvius, and you know what? It could have happened. The historical timing worked. The method of transport was there. St. Paul traveled to Malta, and it made sense that he would have stopped in at least one of the ports of Pompeii, or Herculaneum, or Stabiae. I started writing the novel as a quest, but my underlying love of romance took over, and before long, the novel changed course. I still wrote the quest, shared the information I'd learned with the world, and added my flair for all things romantic that went with it. A lot of research went into that novel, including learning Italian. I discovered so many things I'd never known before, possible directions to take the novel, that I nearly got lost along the way. What was I really writing about? Ultimately, I chose a theme and stuck to it. The end product was called The Treasure of St. Paul, which was reissued as Touched by the Sun, and has ultimately been remaindered. Written 20 years ago, it hasn't withstood the test of time. That, and as my first serious writing endeavor, there were lots of visible growing pains. I may rewrite that story one day, but for now, it's better on the shelf. Which brings me to another tangent. I have always been a fan of Victoria Holt. My mother handed me one of her books, my first romance novel, and I was hooked. I have most of her books, either in paperback or hardcover, and I still pull them from the shelves from time to time when I want something to read. Maybe it's the emotional connection to my mother, or maybe it's that I really did love her writing style. Some of these books have not withstood the test of time. As much as I loved her growing up, the last book I reread was horribly dated, with the myopic views of a society we have since outgrown. We have evolved as a people, and the trope at the center of the story actually made me angry as I applied it to 21st century society. Now I'm afraid to go back and read some of the other ones. But back to the topic at hand. We write because there is something we want to say, some knowledge we want to import, life experiences or ideas or emotions we want to share. Every book I've written is infused with a piece of me, and generally not the pieces people imagine. You know, people will read one of my romances and they'll say, "Oh my God, I can't look at you the same way." It's not me, folks, okay? Sometimes it's a random phrase someone said to me. Sometimes it's the way something made me feel. Sometimes it's a unique experience, all of which invokes some type of emotional response. Case in point, Intimate Distance, my second book, was written after someone at work mentioned to me that a bank president left his wife and family for someone he had met online, someone he'd never met. This was at the beginning of the internet when AOL was new and we all used dial-up modems. The shock, the outrage, the intimacy of talking to someone you've never met who won't pass judgment. Sort of like the old-time movie The Shop Around the Corner from 1949 about pen pals who happen on each other by chance, which was later made into the movie You Got Mail that people are more familiar with. My third book, Living Canvas, was inspired by a trip I'd taken to Scotland, a trip I'd taken after reading the first couple of Outlander novels. I still swear I took that tour on a dream state, including envisioning the bridge into Brigadoon at one of the stops. Yes, I have a vivid imagination. These were emotional responses during a very emotional time of my life that I just had to write about. I incorporated that trip with my quest to find a wedding venue. Yes, I got married at a B&B, and also during a difficult time at work with an HR manager who was hired as a hatchet man. As good old F. Scott said, a natural outpouring of emotions. But it doesn't end there. I had a character in Living Canvas that I'd based loosely on a friend who wasn't always kind to me, and that came through in the story, unfortunately. When I got blowback from readers about her, I figured I'd better write her story and why she was the way she was, which took me back to my high school days and another emotional touch point. My first ambition was to be a professional tennis player. I played from age 10 on, every day I could. Some of those highlights made it into the book, although my character never achieved the ranking I did. From there, I had so much fun redeeming the unlikable character that I went back to Living Canvas to pick up the other villain to redeem for the next book. The personal touchpoint in Cookie Therapy was my clumsiness. It's the emotion that inspires the events in the book, not that those things have ever happened to me. More a state of mind. Each book has one of those touchpoints, something that sparked an emotional response. Not necessarily something that actually happened to me, but something I witnessed and developed into something more. For instance, that friend who wasn't a very good friend? Funny how she showed up in yet another book in another capacity. The second time, even my editor didn't like her, and I had to redevelop her character. The bottom line here is that writers want to evoke an emotional response, and we often do that by drawing on something that impacted us, even peripherally. Maybe it's something someone else can relate to, like a bad friend, or taking readers on a tour somewhere they haven't been before. Hey, I traveled to Scotland based on a book I read so I could see it for myself because I was so impacted by a novel. I've written books inspired by movies I've seen. You'd never know it by reading the book, but yes, really. Movies like Pillow Talk with Doris Day and Rock Hudson, The House That Would Not Die with Barbara Stanwyck. There's one I bet no one else remembers. And yes, the answer to the question about do real people inspire my characters? I modeled one heroine after a man I worked with who stuttered. Not him precisely, but the inner light that shone through. I was so impressed with his confidence, standing in front of a group of people and conducting a training session, that I wanted to use that trait in a novel, looking past an imperfection to the underlying person. Sometimes along the journey, I discover a character out of the blue. Someone I've created who inspires me. That was the case with Matt in Cookie Therapy, and with most of the characters in Epitaph. I'd never met any of those people, and most of those traits I'd never experienced. They showed up in a book, and they carried their own books beyond that. You'll find little pieces of my life in my books, yes, like putting together a jigsaw puzzle at Christmas, which is a warm memory for me, a ride in a hansom cab. But no, none of my characters are me, and while they may walk the places I've been, their experiences in those places are their own. The goal is to capture a feeling, to share with you an experience or knowledge or an emotion in a way that entertains, like having a conversation with a friend. I want to tell you about the things I saw and did, and how they made me feel. Tune in next time when I talk with Terry O'Dell, author of Mysteries with Relationships.